Friction, Ostinato, by Ben Murphy.
Mina couldn't even afford a subscription to the beat. The most basic, primal element of a song, and here she was, dry, walking through the central plaza as Delta sang at its center, a far-off kaleidoscope. The only sound Mina could hear came from the mass of bodies all around, churning with music too expensive for the likes of her. The city was alive and alight, the shouts and whoops and laughter of the crowd mingling into a great, gloating hum. The verandas around the plaza, the balconies of buildings that towered over it, these too were filled with dancing, cheering people, slick with sweat and joy. And they all listened to the songs which made Mina quiver, which made something inside her thrum when she listened to them by herself, and which were here denied her. Delta's voice sounded like being born, like discovering the world existed, and life before that moment had just been practice, like opening your eyes and discovering a chaos of need and shock and lust and beauty that had been there all along and was now yours. Delta's voice sounded like what it meant to be alive. Mina knew all of her songs by heart, knew all the alternate versions, played them again and again when she was alone in her room while her sister was tuned in to a stream and passed out. Mina wanted nothing more than to hear Delta's voice and Delta's presence, to see her lips move, to see her body move, for them to be joined in the union of music. Beneath her feet, the plaza glowed, pulsing along with the music, the shade shifting with every passing moment. Down beneath the plaza, visible through its translucence, were the underzones, dark and silent. Someone near her, presuming she was simply Stag, took her hand and tugged gently toward a cluster of dancers. They all turned to her and welcomed her, spreading their arms as they shook, inviting her in with their smiles. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped, saying nothing. They wouldn't be able to hear what she said. Their minds were filled with harmony and song. Some tried to speak, but so loud was the music in their heads that only garbled sounds came out, a fluttering of syllables and sibilants that ran together with the cacophony of 10,000 ecstatic bodies. Their expressions were puzzled. Perhaps they were uncertain if they'd managed coherence. Perhaps they simply couldn't conceive of the type of poverty that couldn't afford a subscription, the type of poverty that Mina and her sister knew. She turned and fled, pushing through other dancers, through the light of the city and the heat of the night, pushing through the music in the air that she couldn't hear, pushing through it all toward home, the only place she wanted to be less than this one. Yours truly is here, my saucy musketeers, in the repellently hip Grand Plaza, listening to the greatest of our lesser angels, Delta, she-queen of the sick scene. She is glowing like the gates in the word both, and when she opens her mouth, look out, will all come crashing down. And yet, as of publication time, and barring the sorts of catastrophic newsgasms that would just break your loyal correspondent straight in twain, can you imagine me failing you? No, neither can I. We'll have gone a year without a release from the immaculate Deltacular one. Your dogged correspondent has it on good authority, my scrumptious thrilligance, that not all is well in Delta Land. She remains the only performer who has worked with Har Money Machine, Q44, and Perpetuality, and oh, how it has benefited her. But the word from certain quarters, the dirty word, is that she has been, let us be delicate, somewhat more resistant to collaboration than she used to be. A contract dispute? Yes and no. More dispute with all things as they stand, which is to say, not quite straight. You know me, my darling Peppadews, and you know my long-standing fondness for our sweetness, the incomparable Deltabulus, and so I wouldn't dare publish a word against her. But enough of that. She is here now and she is singing, and if you're not out here too, singing and dancing with her, then I'll be sure to send a card to your next of kin, because that's the only excuse your faithful correspondent will accept for not being here, drinking in all the joy that Delta is willing to pour out for us. Delta knew she wasn't supposed to look at the subscription numbers. She didn't know of any other performer who did. It could be a punishing revelation, finding out that only 10% of the people at your own show could hear your voice. This didn't stop her from checking every night. This particular evening she had held off. It was the first performance of the series, no reason to invite disillusion in before its presence was required. Out across the city's central plaza, the concertgoers had gathered to dance and laugh and fall in love. The balconies that overlooked the plaza, cantilevered out over its edges from buildings that stretched up into invisibility, were filled as well, bodies packed in tight, drinks in hands raised high, dozens of miniature recreations of the grand plaza beneath. Everywhere were shifting lights and the clean smell of sweat, heavy and exhilarating, and Delta felt a thin sheen of moisture on her own skin as she swung her mic stand like a weapon. It spun out while the music swirled through her head, while she strutted across the stage, taking in the scene, the vast openness of the sky, the thousand upturned faces. Her will didn't last quite as long as she would have liked. She flicked on the subscription overlay, and atop each head in the audience a small circle appeared, divided into colors denoting which elements they had paid to hear. Dark purples and blues predominated, denoting those who could hear the bass and the beat. The lead instruments and harmonic accompaniment, red and orange, were prevalent as well, though less ubiquitous than the deeper colors. A smattering of other shades, for aux percussives, backing vocals, underlying soundscape, appeared as well. The green of Delta's own voice was painfully rare, present mostly in the brightly colored wheels of full subscribers who listened to the music in its complete form. She flicked off each layer of the overlay, removing the blue, then the purple, then the red, until only the green of those who heard her remained. She felt a familiar disappointment. The crowd had been rendered mostly dark, and she flicked off this final layer as well, unaltered reality returning. In truth, Delta could tell what people were hearing simply by watching them move. There were the bass junkies who just wanted to feel the throb, clustered around the edges of the crowd, moving as one with rhythmic heaving. There were the ethereal obsessives, blissed out and drifting on abstract harmonies and nebulous, gauzy tones. Their arms writhed and floated as they swayed, without coordination. There were the snobs, interested only in the virtuosity of the programmed instruments, disdain for the hedonists around them evident on their faces. And of course, there were the full subscriptions, or those splurging for one night of the complete package, the entire song audible to them. She looked out over the rise and fall of bodies, the inevitable shudder of flesh, a writhing mass like a single, desperate organism, churning atop the music's build, a bed of downbeats, the pulse doubling at intervals until it was a thumping hum, the anticipation more physical than musical, then a moment of freefall, then the impact of the drop. She was more sheepdog than chanteuse, simply moving the mass. There were a few pockets of attendees who sang along with her, but this seemed more like conspicuous consumption than genuine enthusiasm, proof that they could afford her voice. She knew many performers didn't even bother singing, letting vocal synthesizers take care of it while they danced in the crowd, not even bothering to keep up the charade. Delta had steadfastly refused to consider this option, but as she stood before the crowd and raised her voice, audible only to those in the first row and a scattering of those beyond, she understood it. When Mina got home, her sister and their roommates were tuned in to one of the popular free streams. They were arrayed on various couches, twitching occasionally, laughing or gasping together. She flicked a preview on and saw that the streamer was skydiving and was about to leap out into the air. There was a small shriek from her sister at the moment the fall began, while their roommates cheered and hooted. Mina followed along in a preview window, waiting for the streamer to land while she decided if she was hungry. By the time she decided she wasn't, the streamer was high-fiving various muscle-bound and flamboyantly skinned fellow streamers, and Mina messaged her sister. There was always a certain sluggishness when someone came out of a stream, as their body was reminded of what real stimuli felt like, not those their brain had fooled them into experiencing. Mina waited patiently as Ava's eyes and ears and skin adjusted to the room she lay in. After a minute or two, the dazed expression passed from her face, and she stood from the couch to join Mina. So you know how Delta is performing this week, Mina began. I do, Ava said. And you know how there's literally no one I'd like to see perform more than her? I do. Then, knowing these things, do you think you might be able to help me buy a package for one of her shows? I do not. It wouldn't even have to be all of the channels, Mina said, immediately attempting negotiations which she knew were hopeless. I could get by with, 3. There was an adolescent whine in her voice that she hated, entirely inappropriate for someone who had reached legal consumption age. I'm sorry, Mina. I just can't. You know I can't. We're both working double shifts as it is. Then why don't we have any money? Ava spread her hands and smiled sadly, an older sister made mother by their parents' arrears incarceration. Because this is life, she said. What she didn't say, what she didn't have to say, was because we live here. Because we have debt we can't pay off but have to keep paying. Moms and dads and our own. Mina nodded. I wish we had it, Ava said. You'd know I'd give it to you if we did. I know. But our accounts? She shrugged. I just thought that maybe this one time will have to be like each other time, I'm afraid. It always is. I know. And I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, Ava said, and returned to the couches where their roommates still lay, still gasping and twitching from the life they streamed. Mina watched as she sat down, watched the slackening of her expression as the stream passed over her, watched her expression snap into alignment with that of their roommates, a thrilled, giggling terror, and then relief. This wasn't the life that Mina wanted. They lived on the platforms, in luxury, compared to the underzones below. But wealth of a certain kind is indistinguishable from poverty. All that Mina had was rented, or subscribed to, packaged with her employment. The flat, the food, the implants, even their yearly health checkup were a product of either her job in sanitation admin or her sister's job at the stations. The substance of Mina's life was leased from those who actually owned things. So what was it that she wanted? She didn't know. Her wants were nebulous and ill-defined. They brooded in the corner of her thoughts, hid behind things she didn't mean to say, clung to petulance and envy. She couldn't pin them down or find them. They ached from hidden places inside her. All she knew was that she felt them so powerfully it unnerved her. I must, my delicious trickities, editorialize for a moment. A sidebar, if you please. I, your humble correspondent, insignificant in the eyes of the fabulicious one, long-time laborer in the salt mines of this sordid industry, must abase myself before the blessed Delta for her refusal to bow before pressure from the neurosynchronization movement. Even with advances in sensory simulacra, synaptic modulators, and radically improved neural prophylactics like cerebral cortection, yours truly wishes to advocate for good old-fashioned pharma-musical experiences as the best way to enjoy Delta's genius. As long as we're all still kicking these flesh bags round the block, why not take advantage of some of their unique idiocies? Whether you're top or bottom, up or down, whether you want the taste of that strange or are set with the charm, your lowliest of correspondents believes that the frippery of albums like Tyrannosaurus Sex is beneath us. The simultaneous stabs of dopamine, the shared tremor of the implant's artifice, isn't it all just so unbearably twee? Let's leave such nonsense to the lilograms, with their dietary supplements and their sensible shoes, their smug satisfaction and their silent, secret boredom. Farewell, Mom and Dad. Enjoy your evening. Enjoy your lives. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you when it's time. Not for us the program's dictates. Not for us the focus group's thrill. Betsy to heavens, do you read me, heavens? Are you there? Heavens to Betsy. This is Heavens to Betsy. I read you loud and clear. Let's drop one, you and I, and see what this meat can do. Let's coast a while. See if we come up together. See if we end up surfacing right when it's the right time for right to be. Let's enjoy this thing, but the way we want to enjoy it, not how the algorithm has decreed. So next time you're out, listening to Euphony, moving your movers, shaking your shakers, feeling that tickle of a good time down in the unmentionable tasty bits of your mind. Maybe turn off the neurosync. Unplug the NSB. No, you won't feel exactly what that spicy little number you've been trying to climb is feeling. You know the one. But you might find you're feeling something even better. Something you can trust to be there, still, once the song ends. The morning after the first performance at the plaza, Delta sat by her window, looking out over the city, the sun edging into view over the horizon, doubling and tripling on the windows of each building so that she watched 100 sunrises in reflection. The angles and curves of the buildings warped each of them, so some were fragmented, some distended, their reddish glow rising up to her room like a promise. The city was quiet, most of its inhabitants still asleep. Far beneath her, the glow of the translucent streets was gentle, and its shifting slow. A few cafes were opening, their owners arranging tables and chairs as they prepared for breakfast, and Delta would likely soon sit at one of them with her assistant to discuss the exec's notes from the previous night. They had begun pushing her. A year since her last hit, since her last song, was much too long a stretch for anxious suits. Every morning she woke with half a dozen different tracks ready for approval. All she had to do was add her voice, the work of a day, if that. She listened to each song on offer, scrolled through the alternative lyrics and timbres, and rejected them all in turn. Lately, the threat of a vocal synthesizer had been floated, mostly subtly, if she didn't release something, anything, to keep the engine running. She didn't take these threats particularly seriously. Her subscription numbers were still 3 times as high as the next most popular performer, and he was keeping a song a week pace, but Delta could tell the execs were getting more nervous by the week. She told them she would only perform her own songs, and that she didn't have time to write, that performing took too much out of her. This was a lie. It took almost nothing at all to show up and sing, when she knew so little of her voice would make it to an audience, when she knew she'd be performing songs that fell comfortably within her range, and that she'd been singing for years. It took almost nothing to sing songs she'd written before she wanted to challenge herself, to stretch and grow. It took almost nothing to sing songs that now disappointed her. The truth was, she'd written more music in the past 3 months than she had in her entire life. She simply had no intention of allowing it to be ruined by letting the execs code it and program it and test a dozen different timbres and beats until the song stopped being a song and became a product. Her realization that she hated her own music had dawned so slowly, so gradually, that she didn't realize it was happening until she'd walked out on stage one night, opened her mouth to sing the first song, then walked off stage again. Her harmony techs had been loyal enough to follow her, and the whole episode was chalked up to exhaustion. That had been a year ago, and had begun the fallow period she now slouched through. She'd agreed to resume performing, on the condition that she'd only release new music when and if she wanted to. The execs had readily accepted this, but she'd quickly come to realize that she no longer wanted to share anything she produced with them, and so for 10 months she'd released nothing, a pace which the public, and the suits, no doubt considered positively glacial. Delta had not slept after the show ended. She'd spent the last several hours finishing a song, recording it almost as she was writing it. She'd programmed the parts freehand, ignoring Q44 and HMM, ignoring the meticulously curated timbre databases, trusting only herself and her ear. She had sung the wordless melody the minutes before dawn, while the sky was still pink and tender, and she could see a dim reflection of herself in the window. It was a slow, sad song, starting at the very bottom of her range and, for the most part, staying there. The verse was long and repeated once, building throughout, before leaving up an octave for a chorus and a second verse, then up again for another chorus, before falling back down to the bottom of her range for a coda. This spelt it out so powerfully her voice had broken. She'd listened to the song a dozen times, uncertain if the small tumble blemished the song or lent it life. It sounded old, affected, a charge that had been leveled at her in the past. She had no trouble copping to it. Her use of a microphone was certainly an affectation, and an absurd one at that, given how much more effective her implants were at capturing her voice. But she felt a fondness for the past, which was perhaps misplaced, and was certainly gauche, but was real nonetheless. Even the speakers she listened to the song on were anachronistic, the air an imperfect medium to transmit music, when more modern alternatives were available. She didn't know if she wanted the song to have words, or if she liked it the way it was. It felt rough-hewn, and there was a rawness to the sound that she was shocked to discover she loved, as she had worked for years to smooth such turbulences from her music and render her voice frictionless. She started the song again, closing her eyes and leaning forward, trying to empty herself so that the music might fill her, so that she might know exactly what it was the song evoked. She felt lonely, excited, proud and secretive, hopeless, like her heart filled her chest and was an instrument she didn't know how to play, like the voice she was hearing belonged to someone else, a sort of top-heavy weightlessness, a weakness in her muscles, an undirected sense of motion, like there was enough time in the space of a bar to redeem the world, that something foreign lived within her, moved within her, liquid and hungry and beautiful, a stillness that scared her with its completeness and with how much it called to her. The song finished, the last bars her voice alone, the other sounds having dropped away, the raggedness of her voice naked and unavoidable and, she decided, fitting perfectly with the emotion of the song. There was movement in the window, and with a final moment of darkness, Delta saw the reflection of her assistant behind her, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "That was you," Fawn said. It was a surprised statement, not a question. Delta said nothing. "You're recording again?" "Some exercises," Delta said. "That's all." "How much of them did you hear?" "I just came in. I only heard that. The end." "The rough bit." Delta turned around, smiling. "That's what exercises are for, right?" Fawn said, her expression blank. The relationship had begun as a business arrangement, then grew into a friendship, before withering into something strictly business again. "So how's your voice feeling then?" Fawn asked. "Fine. Mostly fine. As you heard." Do you want to go over the new offers?" Delta sighed. "Are there any good ones?" Fawn shrugged. "They're offering one-song contracts which would be very lucrative." She rarely made a secret of her disdain for Delta's pickiness or her recalcitrance, which were, in fact, what had caused the distance between them. "None stood out to me, though. Maybe you'll hear something I don't." She shared the new songs, and Delta filed them away, not yet ready for the ordeal of coming up with reasons to reject them. "Maybe," Delta said. "What else do we have?" "We've got about half an hour for breakfast, then you've got an appearance with Cogitate. 7 minutes, standard fare. Anything I need to remember?" "We're spotlighting Q44, so a minimum 3 mentions for it, and there are open contracts for Cognito, Dr. Time, and Light Show, so those are up to you." She pushed the information into Delta's view. "Easy money, though." "Isn't it all?" "Okay, after that, personal meets with the change board mods." "Is it going to be like last time?" "No. There's been extensive official vetting, and I've got my own worms in them. They'll be enthusiastic, but it'll be fine." "All right. Anything else?" "Execs at 3, and a free stream, but that can come at any point before the final show." Fawn smiled for the first time. "Bonus points if you do a surprise stream in the middle of the night." "Yeah, bonus points." Delta took a deep breath. "Well, let's get to it." "It's finally here, my Rand Adge set 274 to 735, Rand Noun set 1465 to 1658. The newest release from Delta will drop tonight. And your Rand Adge set self correspondent has discovered it will feature some of the hottest names in the music industry, including, if pay greater than 0, then promoted program, else featured program. The song's release comes just a few days after the current Delta #1 track. Singer began her week-long series at the Grand Plaza, include If True, and she will debut it at the residency's final performance. Yours truly has heard it and can assure you that, if pay greater than 0, then worth the wait graph, else to be desired graph. It's sure to, if pay greater than 0, then thrill, else disappoint fans of her previous work, with its clear evocation of, if song BPM greater than 96, then current high delta track with BPM greater than 96, else song revolution. She especially, if pay greater than 0, then pushes the edge, else underwhelms, where she sings lyrics. The wait has been long, and her most devoted fans may understandably be feeling some fatigue at her pace, or lack thereof, but they need wait no longer. Song is here, and your Rand Adge set self correspondent, if read time less than 10, then set humor greater than 3, graph type punchy, else set sass less than 2, graph type thoughtful. Include corp avail, links, buy. The song was perfect. Mina loved it as soon as she heard it. Sure, it was different, anyone could hear that, but it was a good different. It was the day of Delta's final performance at the Plaza, and a new song, her first in a year, had been released the night before. Mina had spent the entire night listening to it and arguing on the change board about it. Some didn't like the fact that it had no words, to which Mina replied that it didn't need words, that the notes themselves did more than words ever could. Some didn't like how rough it sounded, to which Mina replied that that was how you knew it really was Delta, and not a VSIN. And some didn't like how slow it was, how sad, how depressing, to which Mina replied that they were idiots. Mina knew she had to go to the performance, knew she had to experience the song, the lights, the flow of bodies, knew she had to see Delta stand before her and sing. But Mina's account was so woefully empty, she wouldn't be able to afford even this one single night of Delta's voice. She could buy a night of bass and beat, and if she wanted to empty out, she could even get a night of harmony, too. But Delta herself, Mina could not afford. And so she walked, trying to figure it out, desperate and aching with devotion. Mina and her sister lived near the edge of the city, out where the streets had stopped glowing years ago, and now lay inert and plainly translucent. The authority had promised for years to fix them, to restore the vivacity that they brought, but had thus far failed to do so. The underzones were clearly visible as a result, a bramble of streets and squat buildings, a parallel world to which Mina had no access. People lived down there, an astounding, impossible truth, made music even, or had once. Stumblecore and glide and daisy punk, genres that were just words to Mina, genres that were irrelevant, for they didn't include Delta. Just north of Mina's apartment lay the stations, where the trains docked every night, disgorging their grain from the farms to be worked into hamburgers and ice cream in the plain, fortified bars Mina's employment provided. It was where Mina's sister was employed, a make-work job, allowed to exist by the authority only to ensure that there were always some jobs available to the least connected. Automation could easily have taken it. Mina loved the stations for how empty they were, and hated that she had nowhere else her own to love. She walked through them now, stepping through fences and over tracks, hanging back as a train sighed silently into its berth, still sweating with condensation from the climb up to the city out of the steam below. There was always a smell that clung to the trains, and the moisture and grain they bore, and her sister when she came home from work, of fetid, rotting life. It hung in the air as water droplets slid down the side of the train and made Mina dizzy with longing and nausea and wonder that a different world lived outside the city, and she would never see it. She traced the path the train had taken with her eyes, following the tube that had carried it out through the thicket of small buildings beyond the stations, out as the city fell away at its edge into open air, out into the great pillars that held the tubes aloft, a line that slid from the city and down to the earth beneath. Out there were the wilds, the farms, the rubble of what had once been. It was all denied to Mina, as so much was. The sun had begun to rise behind her, in the shadow of the city, its great hump-backed arc, the many struts that bore it, stretched across the land. Morning always seemed to creep up, skulking at the edges of the horizon until it had arrived, inevitably, when she wasn't looking. She wasn't supposed to be at the stations. Her signature wasn't recognized by the facility, and the lights had remained off, but that had never stopped her before. She came to think, to be away from her sister, to sit somewhere she could browse the boards without having to disable her senses to avoid distraction. And, if she wanted to, she could disable the boards as well and quiet her mind. She did so, flicked off all of her implants, closed her eyes and slowed her breathing, stood there, opened her eyes and reached out, marveling at what the world had to offer. There were smells that hadn't been tested or approved, an insistent darkness with no lights in the street to soothe or invigorate, real, vibrant sounds that she felt and heard, the clang and grind of machinery, the whip of wind, the deep, warm rumble of the air vibrating up out of the tubes, a great sense of mystery and surprise. An idea came to her. A name on the boards had complained of the disconcerting humanity of Delta's voice, which, it claimed, was the decided downgrade from her previous work. Whether this was a genuine objection or was a plant from one of the Wiesen Corps mattered little to Mina. It was, first off, wrong. But, more importantly, it had reminded Mina of a fact that mostly failed to occur to her. Delta would be singing at the performance. Delta refused to look at Fawn. She stood with her back turned, gazing out the window over the plaza, the series' final performance fast approaching. The first concert-goers had filtered in hours before, and the wide open space that the plaza had once been was now so full of people Delta could see it only as an ocean of humanity, irregularly sloshing with unseen currents. Pre-parties had long since commenced, with pockets of dancers moving in one to the silent sound of shared playlists. Soon, Delta would descend from this room, emerge out onto that stage, and those pockets would disappear, subsumed by the mass, which would move at her command, at the command of her music, its beat, its rhythm. "Viv," Fawn said, "you need to leave." "Vivian, don't." Fawn said nothing, and they stood there in silence. Delta ran through the set list in her mind, noting the areas that would tax her the most and the spots where she could relax. She synced her light show with the songs and tested the colors on the palms of her hands, watching her skin cycle through blues, reds, purples, yellows, wondering, all the while, whether she could bring herself to sing. She did everything she could to avoid thinking about Fawn, to avoid dealing with her, knowing that the conversation they would soon have was inevitable. Delta had found out she'd released a new song the same way the rest of the world had, when it hit the shop. It didn't take much to figure out that Fawn had heard the entirety of the song the morning after the first show, had simply turned on a personal stream and recorded it, and then taken it to the execs. Delta's voice had been isolated, the harmonies and rhythms reproduced with the tested and approved timbres and beats, though the tinkering had been minimal, a sop to her pride, Delta supposed. It was, for the most part, the song she had written. It didn't feel like that, though. The execs had said nothing yet, of course. They were waiting to see what her response would be. "What did they offer you?" Delta asked at last. Was it just money? A contract. Ah. 30 songs, guaranteed. You should have held out for 50. I have an option for an additional 10. They have an option for a second 30. What software will they license? Rigorous Mort. Delta snorted. For everything? Yeah. Delta didn't have to turn around to know Fawn was blushing. They said if things go well, we can upgrade. They lied. Rigorous Mort's developers have been paying for use. If you don't sell a single song, your whole career will still be revenue neutral for your execs. Fawn said nothing. You sold yourself cheap. Delta shook her head and laughed quietly. You sold me cheap. Vivian, stop calling me that. I didn't have any other choice. And where did this cringing come from? They'll eat you alive. Stop it. Did you think I was just going to go on fetching your coffee? That's better. Did you think I had no life outside of you? You need to be angry without showing it. Angry but not so angry that they can call you angry. I've wanted this for so long. You need to be who you've been before. Did you think I'd work for you forever? No. Delta turned around. No, I didn't. Fawn's face was flushed, and her whole body was trembling slightly. But I didn't think you'd do this. Delta felt such profound pity for this woman that it almost took her breath away. How small she had proven to be, and how easy she'd revealed Delta to be. One crack in the wall, and she'd crumbled. She would sing. Of course she would sing. Delta put a hand on Fawn's shoulder and pushed her, gently, toward the door. You need to go. I need to get ready. She smiled. I'm going to have to work tonight. For one song, at least. It really is a great song, Viv. I know. Fawn stepped outside and turned, clearly wanting to say something, but failing to do so. What are they going to call you? Delta asked. Second Epsilon. Delta nodded slowly. Epsilon was good. Maybe they do have some confidence in you. She nodded again. Good luck, Ep2, she said, and swung the door shut. Delta stood on stage, the hum of the opening notes of her first song deep in her mind. It made her thoughts vibrate. She adjusted the bass, quieted it. This brought relief. The stage was still in darkness. In moments, she would step forward, the glow of her skin swelling with the hum, turning her magenta, and the crowd would add their voices, and then she would sing. There was a tremor within her, and around her, in all things, as there always was in this moment, just before it all began. Mina had camped out in front of the stage since mid-morning. For hours, she'd sat with her back to it, leaning against the lip, while the only other people in the plaza had been children, passing time, and elderly wanderers. Now, though, she stood, her body pressed on three sides by other bodies, and on one by the stage. A murmur rippled across the crowd, and she knew that the opening notes of the first song had begun, notes she could not hear. On stage, shadows moved, one of them Delta, and Mina leaned in closer, not knowing what she would hear, but certain it was exactly what she wanted. The first song was the same song Delta always opened with, the first song she'd recorded, the first song she'd ever written. It had a childish energy, was almost embarrassing in its simplicity, and the response produced was practically reflexive. Before the first notes, the crowd was moving, and Delta moved as well, lost for a moment in the music, in the irresistible shudder, the beat skipping along in her toes and her pulse, each rush of blood through her fingers making the mic jump in her hand. No matter what else happened, no matter how she felt about the songs she was singing, the act of singing would remain a pleasure. The feel of her lungs' power, the force she held within her, the way her throat opened, the way she shaped sound into what she willed, there was a charge in all of this that could not be taken from her. And then the song was over, and the response was something she knew well, that she heard almost every night, the audience cheering and screaming and clapping all at once, so that it joined together as a single exhalation, a thunderous, ecstatic sigh of release. The new song, her first new song in a year, was next. It was the most difficult song she would sing, and she wanted it out of the way. It was the song she least wanted to sing, and for this, as well, she wanted it out of the way. It had been taken from her. A part of her had been taken from her, and now she had to display that part to the world, had to participate in this exposure of herself. She stood before the crowd, her song a rumble in the corners of her mind, and then it began, and she sang, and tears broke, and she hated how she pitied herself. Without thinking, punishing herself, perhaps, or distracting herself, she flicked on the subscription overlay, the circles leaping into existence above the crowd, numberless pinwheels of color. Even here, now, with a new song, the precious green of her voice was mostly absent. She closed her eyes. Mina stood in the front row, watching, her face wet. There was only Delta's voice, naked and small and quiet beneath the sounds of the crowd, unamplified, in her ears and in the air, and she had to strain, as no one else around her did, to hear it. It was quiet, and so painfully human, so heartbroken, that the breath caught at Mina's throat. Even without the swell of the music, Mina loved the song. Delta's voice was enough for her, carried enough that even like this, with a swirl of distractions around it, covering and obscuring it, she was moved to sorrow and elation by its beauty. On stage, Delta clung to the microphone, adrift, afraid to open her eyes, afraid that if she did, she'd be unable to continue. She could feel herself shaking, could feel the stage vibrating beneath her feet, could feel the world vibrating around her. In her mind the beats came and went, thudding against her thoughts, inexorable, and she heeded them, pressed on. She sang, as she knew she would. She sang and wondered why she'd resisted so long. She opened her eyes, knowing what was awaiting her, the empty wheels of subscriber information, visible only to her, hanging above each head in the audience. Each head in the audience, save one, a figure directly before her, pressed up against the stage. Delta checked her overlay again, uncertain, an unfamiliar flutter of nerves and confusion in her stomach. The girl was there without the wear necessary to hear any part of her music. She could hear nothing. It was there for no purpose that Delta could surmise. And now, for the first time, she faltered, her voice breaking, at this new, unexpected disappointment. Even the beat had become unnecessary for her fans. She was wholly and utterly superfluous. But the girl leaned in at the stumble, and Delta could see concern on her face, and understood, with a lurch, that the girl wasn't there to feel bodies pressed against her, or to give her own up to the movement of the crowd. She was there to listen, to strain and struggle, and to hear what she could of Delta's voice, whatever scraps the whims of acoustics and luck deigned bring her. Mina tried to draw back as Delta approached the front of the stage. She tried to shrink away as Delta knelt down, but the crowd roared at her back, and she felt hands on her, a gentle pressure, real or imagined, she didn't know, and she stepped forward. Delta held her arm outstretched as she sang, and fans struggled to touch it, but it wasn't to the crowd that she reached. Mina took Delta's hand in her own and staggered as Delta jumped down off the stage, dragging the microphone and its stand behind her, and then Mina was suddenly holding Delta up, their hands joined, their shoulders touching. She was shocked by the pressure of Delta's hand, its heat, the weight of her body. She'd expected an energy, imagined that Delta was some higher being, but no. Here was only skin and sweat, a woman made of the same crude matter as Mina herself, flesh and bone and want. The sounds of the crowd fell away, and Mina felt as if she could hear the music through their touch, through every piece of Delta that leaned against her. And now Delta dropped the mic, took both Mina's hands in hers, and sang to her, and for herself, for them alone. She opened her voice, stretched it as far as she could, and then further, the force of her will granting new notes, notes that broke and broke open, years and sorrow and joy flowing out, and Mina heard and Mina listened, as she would forever, for as long as Delta would sing, and then beyond, until quiet arrived and the music was no more than an echo in the caverns of herself.
You've just listened to Friction, Ostinato by Ben Murphy. This story was read to you by the author. Ben Murphy lives in North Carolina with his wife and a small menagerie. After a brief but fulfilling career as an unsuccessful rock star, he turned to writing. Ben is a member of the Many Worlds Writing Collective and is a fifth of the writing team Darkly Lem, author of the Formation Saga, which starts with Transmutation Transients. He is also a contributing author to Many Worlds or The Simulacra, a fiction anthology from Radix Media, audiobook by Blackstone. A graduate of the MFA program at North Carolina State University, where he now teaches composition, he is at work on a novel. To find out more about Many Worlds, check us out at manyworldsforum.com. Thank you for listening to Many Worlds.